that when people try to argue that she's not the face of our league,
Yeah.
or if our league would be where we're at without her, you're literally dumb.
The WNBA is currently burning to the ground, collapsing under the weight of a betrayal so radioactive, so toxic, that it has permanently shattered the entire sports world. Forget everything you thought you knew about locker room rivalries, because what just happened behind closed doors has exposed a sickening, corrupted system. Sophie Cunningham has officially gone nuclear, weaponizing her brand new podcast to rip the mask off the Indiana Fever's front office, exposing an unthinkable, deep-seated hatred aimed directly at the league's golden girl, Caitlin Clark. The internet is in absolute shambles. Fans are screaming for blood, and the entire basketball community is paralyzed with shock after Sophie completely exposed the Fever president, making a disgusting, undercover move to mentally destroy her own franchise player. We are talking about absolute psychological warfare, a venomous campaign of jealousy and corporate sabotage born from pure envy over Caitlin's unprecedented fame. Sophie didn't just drop a hint. She dropped a devastating hydrogen bomb on the executive suite, revealing that the very people paid to protect Caitlin are the ones leading the vicious pack of wolves trying to tear her down. The dark, disturbing truth about why Caitlin is being hunted is finally out, and this executive horror story is about to get so much worse, leaving everyone asking who can actually be trusted when your own president wants you broken. To comprehend the sheer magnitude of this corporate execution, we must uncover the dark, agonizing history of jealousy and locker room malice that has been festering within the WNBA for months. When Caitlin Clark arrived as a rookie, she didn't just enter a professional league. She stepped directly into a literal war zone filled with resentment and deep-seated animosity. The old guard, seasoned veterans who had labored in empty arenas for decades, watched in absolute fury as this 22-year-old phenom completely hijacked the global spotlight, instantly commanding millions of eyes and skyrocketing TV ratings. Instead of celebrating this unprecedented economic boom, a toxic wave of envy consumed the league's ecosystem, morphing into a calculated, unspoken campaign to humiliate and break her spirit on a nightly basis. Opposing teams held frantic, closed-door meetings specifically designing defensive schemes to physically batter Caitlin, launching aggressive, borderline dangerous cheap shots on the court while referees turned a completely blind eye. But while fans assumed this targeted hostility was strictly coming from envious rivals like Angel Reese or the physical enforcers of the Phoenix Mercury, the reality was infinitely more sinister. Behind the scenes, inside the heavily guarded executive walls of the Indiana Fever franchise itself, a venomous, psychological coup was secretly being orchestrated by the team's own president. Rather than building an impenetrable fortress of security around their multi-million-dollar asset, the front office began viewing Caitlin's astronomical power as a direct threat to their traditional authority and established hierarchy. The internal jealousy grew so severe that team leadership actively resented the fact that a rookie held more leverage, more fame, and more global influence than the entire corporate executive board combined. Sophie Cunningham, witnessing this disturbing dynamic develop while playing across the league, watched in absolute horror as Caitlin was systematically left isolated, unprotected, and emotionally abandoned by her own organization. Caitlin was forced to carry the crushing, suffocating weight of an entire sport on her fragile shoulders, dealing with relentless media scrutiny and vicious physical targeting, completely unaware that her biggest enemy wasn't the opposing defender staring her down on the court. It was the very woman running her own front office, quietly seething in the luxury suites, waiting for the perfect moment to completely diminish her value and strip away her crown. This wasn't standard rookie hazing. This was a deeply calculated, systematic attempt to suppress a generational superstar's influence out of pure, unadulterated executive spite. Sophie knew that keeping quiet meant becoming complicit in the corporate execution of the greatest talent women's basketball had ever seen, prompting her to finally pull the pin on this explosive scandal. But nobody, absolutely nobody, was prepared for the exact moment the corporate mask completely slipped, revealing a betrayal so deep it would leave the entire sports world utterly paralyzed. The breaking point arrived in a secure, soundproof executive boardroom at the Indiana Fever headquarters, where a secret, closed-door meeting transformed into a full-blown corporate execution. Sophie Cunningham, who had recently integrated herself deeply into the inner workings of the franchise, sat in stunned silence as the Fever president unleashed a wave of raw, unfiltered venom directed straight at Caitlin Clark. It wasn't just a critique of her playstyle. It was a deeply personal, highly aggressive character assassination aimed at systematically dismantling Caitlin's status as the face of the organization. The president openly ranted to a select group of executives and veteran players, claiming that Caitlin's meteoric rise was an artificial media illusion that was actively ruining team chemistry and eclipsing the franchise's historical legacy. She explicitly ordered the coaching staff and specific team veterans to intentionally pull back on public praise, aggressively demanding that the media narrative be forcefully shifted away from Clark to put her back in her place. But the true, bone-chilling horror, the first nuclear twist that has sent shockwaves crashing through the entire sports world, was exposed when Sophie revealed exactly how deep this internal sabotage ran. The Fever president didn't just want to diminish Caitlin's off-court brand. She was actively, covertly working behind the scenes with league officials to ensure Caitlin received absolutely no protection from the referees during games. Sophie uncovered explosive, highly confidential communications where the president explicitly told league representatives that the Fever would not complain if opposing teams played excessively physical, with Clark effectively giving the entire league a green light to hunt their own franchise player. The front office was willingly exposing their $100 million savior to career-threatening physical violence, viewing a potential injury or a public emotional breakdown as the perfect corporate tool to humble Caitlin and reclaim absolute control over the franchise. When Sophie discovered that her own team's leadership was actively conspiring with external forces to allow their biggest star to be physically and mentally battered on a nightly basis, her blood completely boiled. She realized that the horrific, mid-court cheap shots and dangerous fouls Caitlin was enduring weren't just a result of rival player jealousy. They were being actively permitted and encouraged by the top executive in Indiana. Armed with this radioactive information, Sophie walked into the recording studio of her podcast, threw away her pre-planned notes, and dropped this devastating truth directly into the microphone, instantly shattering the WNBA's carefully manicured public image. The immediate reaction from within the locker room was pure, unadulterated panic as players suddenly realized that the ultimate betrayal was coming from inside the house. Yet, just as the front office scrambled to draft a desperate, late-night public relations cover-up, an even bigger, more catastrophic revelation was about to leak from the depths of the executive suite. The executive sabotage did not stop at corporate mandates. It quickly escalated into a terrifying, real-time crisis on the court that nearly cost Caitlin Clark her entire career. Following the president's secret directives, an absolute breakdown in team protection manifested during a high-stakes game against the Connecticut Sun, where opposing defenders were allowed to ruthlessly batter Caitlin without a single whistle from the officials. Sophie Cunningham, playing the role of the Fever's fiercest on-court enforcer, grew so utterly consumed by rage at the sight of her teammate being targeted that she physically intervened, resulting in a viral, explosive altercation to shield Caitlin from the violence. Behind the scenes, the internal warfare reached a boiling point when Sophie marched directly into a tense, 2-hour emergency locker room meeting to confront the coaching staff and specific veteran players who were actively executing the president's hidden agenda. Sophie openly accused the leadership of orchestrating a psychological coup to mentally break Caitlin, creating an unprecedented, hostile rift that split the Indiana Fever locker room into two warring factions. But just as the franchise attempted to forcefully suppress the rising internal rebellion, the second major, nuclear twist leaked from the front office, completely shattering the sports landscape. High-level corporate whistleblowers revealed that the Fever president's calculated campaign of sabotage was fueled by a secret, jaw-dropping financial conflict of interest. Financial ledgers exposed that the president was covertly working with external corporate investors tied to rival superstars like Angel Reese and Paige Buchers, aiming to intentionally suppress Caitlin's market value so rival brands could seize control of the league's multi-million-dollar economic boom. The front office was actively sacrificing their own rookie phenom's mental health and physical safety on a nightly basis, sabotaging game strategies and fueling locker room division just to satisfy corporate greed and ego. Sophie's podcast revelation didn't just expose a jealous executive, it uncovered a highly illegal, deep-rooted web of corporate corruption designed to systematically dethrone the face of the WNBA from within her own house. The sheer scale of this executive betrayal sent the Indiana front office into an absolute, frantic tailspin as secret memos and rigged corporate agendas were dragged into the blinding public light. Sophie publicly declared that she would gladly absorb every massive league fine and executive threat thrown her way, boldly stating she would act as the ultimate shield to protect Caitlin from the venomous wolves running the organization. This wasn't a standard athletic disagreement anymore. It had evolved into an all-out, career-threatening war between a corrupted corporate regime and the players determined to save the greatest talent in women's basketball. As news of the secret corporate collusion spread like wildfire, a massive wave of panic gripped the highest offices of the WNBA, triggering a monumental public fallout that no one could control. Yet, the true, devastating emotional damage of this corporate execution was about to hit Caitlin Clark directly, unleashing a psychological storm that threatened to change the future of the sport forever. The blinding, radioactive fallout from Sophie Cunningham's nuclear expose blasted through the sports world like a Category 5 hurricane, leaving the WNBA's billion-dollar ecosystem permanently fractured. Within minutes of the podcast airing, the internet erupted into absolute, unadulterated chaos as millions of enraged fans flooded social media, making the Fever president's immediate resignation the #1 trending topic worldwide. Die-hard supporters, utterly sickened by the realization that Caitlin Clark was being hunted by her own front office, began burning tickets, launching massive stadium boycotts, and flooding corporate sponsors with fierce ultimatums to pull their funding. WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert was forced into a state of absolute, frantic panic, calling urgent, late-night emergency meetings with all 12 franchise owners to contain a public relations nightmare that was actively vaporizing the league's economic credibility. The pristine corporate image the WNBA had spent decades trying to build was completely obliterated in a single afternoon, replaced by the ugly, undeniable reality of a corrupted executive dictatorship fueled by toxic envy. But the true, heartbreaking tragedy of this corporate execution was the devastating psychological toll it took on Caitlin herself inside the locker room. The 22-year-old superstar, who had carried the suffocating weight of an entire sport on her back with nothing but grace, was completely shattered by the horrific revelation of this executive backstabbing. Sources close to the team revealed that Caitlin suffered a profound emotional breakdown behind closed doors, utterly crushed by the reality that the woman running her franchise was actively conspiring to see her physically broken and humiliated. An unbearable, toxic paranoia instantly consumed the Indiana Fever locker room, as players like Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell were forced to publicly declare their allegiances, effectively destroying whatever fractured team chemistry remained. Caitlin looked around her own facility and realized she was standing completely alone in a literal snake pit, unable to trust the coaches drawing up the plays or the executives managing her future. The emotional warfare grew so intensely suffocating that Caitlin completely isolated herself from the media, refusing to attend mandatory press conferences and retreating into a state of silent, defensive shock. Sophie Cunningham remained her lone, fierce defender, standing guard outside the locker room doors, openly defying executive gag orders while absorbing a barrage of heavy fines and legal threats from a vengeful front office. Every single game transformed from a basketball contest into a deeply uncomfortable psychological drama, with fans watching Caitlin's every facial expression, looking for signs of a generational talent completely losing her passion for the sport. The entire WNBA world watched in absolute horror as the greatest phenomenon women's basketball had ever seen was systematically pushed to her absolute breaking point by her own organization. Yet, just as the public backlash reached an uncontrollable crescendo, a final, catastrophic corporate maneuver was executed in total secrecy, preparing to deliver the ultimate kill shot to Caitlin's career. Just as the global sports community braced for the Fever president's forced resignation, the corrupted corporate regime executed a ruthless, late-night counterstrike that completely paralyzed the entire basketball world. In a shocking, completely unpredictable turn of events, high-level league whistleblowers leaked a highly confidential, ironclad executive resolution drafted by the Indiana front office. The Fever president hadn't stepped down. Instead, she used her immense corporate leverage to launch an all-out war against the rebels, officially filing a massive, multi-million-dollar breach of contract lawsuit aimed directly at destroying Sophie Cunningham. But the true, nuclear twist that has left millions of fans screaming in absolute horror was the hidden clause buried deep within the legal paperwork, a clause that explicitly targets Caitlin Clark herself. The front office has quietly initiated a forced corporate freeze on Caitlin's contract, utilizing an obscure, bad-faith legal loophole to effectively strip her of her playing rights, completely banning her from stepping foot on a WNBA court under the guise of an internal conduct investigation. The realization of this ultimate corporate execution hit the sports landscape like a devastating tidal wave, turning a locker room scandal into the single biggest sports crime of the century. The Fever president has successfully trapped the face of women's basketball in a legal chokehold, willingly sabotaging her own team's championship aspirations just to ensure Caitlin is forcefully silenced and humbled. Sophie Cunningham now faces an immediate, career-threatening league suspension for violating corporate confidentiality, meaning Caitlin's absolute fiercest on-court protector is about to be forcefully removed from the equation. The entire WNBA is now standing on the absolute precipice of a total structural collapse, with players across all 12 teams reportedly threatening a historic, league-wide strike to protest this disgusting display of corporate corruption. The air inside the Indiana facility is thick with absolute panic, paranoia, and the crushing weight of a generational superstar's career hanging by a single, fraying thread. Caitlin Clark is now faced with an impossible, agonizing ultimatum: publicly apologize to the very executives who sabotaged her and surrender absolute control of her brand, or walk away from the game of basketball entirely. The future of the WNBA has just been cast into absolute, pitch-black darkness, and the clock is ticking down to a catastrophic legal explosion. As the midnight deadline approaches for the league office to ratify this unprecedented contract freeze, the entire world is left staring at the screen in absolute disbelief, completely terrified of what happens when the lights go out. This is no longer just a basketball scandal. This is an all-out war for the very soul of the WNBA, and the fans are the only ones left who can stop this corrupt corporate regime from completely destroying Caitlin Clark's career. The Indiana front office is counting on our silence to bury this toxic betrayal, but we cannot let them get away with executing the most disgraceful executive coup in sports history. Sophie Cunningham risked everything, threw her own career into the line of fire, and absorbed massive fines just to drag this sickening truth into the blinding public light. And now it is our turn to back her up. We need to make our voices so loud that the highest offices in the league crumble under the pressure. Drop your thoughts in the comment section below right now. Should the WNBA commissioner step in and forcefully terminate the Fever president? Or is it time for Caitlin Clark to walk away from this toxic snake pit entirely? Smash that like button, share this video everywhere to expose the corruption, and subscribe to the channel immediately with notifications turned on so you don't miss the next explosive update on this rapidly developing crisis.